Greetings. It's all about good vibrations today in episode 5 of my home music studio build series. Have you ever noticed that every room has its own sound? Some concert halls sound bright and beautiful, and you can hear each instrument clearly and distinctly. Others, like a few neighborhood bars that I've played in, can sound boomy or muddy. Rooms, much like musical instruments, have their own sounds that can be pleasing or harsh to our ears, or somewhere in between. And much like some instruments, they need to be tuned. In this episode, I'll start with a quick recap on sound waves, reflections, absorption and diffusion, and speaker positioning as well. Next, I'll show you how I designed the acoustic panels, bass traps, and ceiling cloud, and how I employed diffusion on the back wall. Finally, I'll have a couple of things to say about the floor treatment. Sound waves generally radiate from a sound source outward in all directions until they hit something in their path. And when sound waves hit an item, they may, depending on the object's surface and composition, bounce or reflect off of that item and travel in another direction. If the waves hit something like a wall straight on, they will reflect straight back at the source. But if they hit the wall at an angle, they will bounce away at a similar angle. These reflections may continue to propagate, with waves bouncing from one reflective surface to another and another, until eventually they lose their energy and dissipate entirely. Reflections can distort your perception of sound by the time the waves hit your ears, making it hard to discern accurate pitch, volume, tone, or positioning of instruments in the stereo field. And if what your brain perceives as faulty, then your ability to track, mix, or master will be compromised. So, how do we tame reflections? The first, easiest, and cheapest thing we can do is to use absorption liberally at first points of reflection, the places in your room where the sound waves hit first before bouncing back to your ears. These are typically within a 10-foot radius of your desk. We can position acoustic panels designed to absorb sound waves on the walls in front of the mixing desk, to its sides, and above the desk as well. How much of the room you cover depends in part on your budget, but also on how flat versus live or ambient a room sound you're seeking. I was after a flat response, so I covered as much of the surface around my desk and above the floor as I could. Now, if you use too much absorption, the room may begin to sound dull or even dead. To remedy this, we should of course look into reducing how much absorption is used, but we can also experiment with diffusion to scatter the sound waves. In contrast to absorption, this technique can help make the room sound livelier and even larger than it is. Diffusion is a pretty deep and complex subject, so I won't say much about it here. There are many different types of diffusers, all rather pricey, and if you hope to save some money by building your own, you'll need to learn a lot more about acoustics. My recommendation is to work with absorption first, then use your ear. First try placing items randomly along the rear wall of your studio, then keep experimenting, trying different things out to hear the effect on the room's sound. I'll show you how I use diffusion in my studio a little later in this video. My monitors are positioned at ear level relative to my sitting position at the desk, slightly angled in, but pointing a little bit past my ears. If I need to, I can easily reach forward and angle them laterally. They are also positioned equidistant to my ears. You don't want one speaker further away than the other, as the sound waves would reach your ears at different times. The monitors are roughly 4 feet back from the front wall acoustic panels, 2 feet from the sidewall panels, 3.5 feet below the ceiling cloud, and 2.5 feet in front of the corner bass traps. This arrangement has successfully mitigated the all too common issue of low-end frequency buildup that can occur when monitors are placed in close proximity to the walls. My desk is surrounded by 11 acoustic panels that are a little over 2 by 4 feet in size and made from 1 by 3 inch pine. Each are about 3 inches deep and are filled with rock wool acoustic insulation that's 2 inches thick. I've covered these panels with Guilford of Maine acoustic fabric. Each panel is mounted off the wall with a 3 to 4 inch gap behind them. Now, this means I'm giving up about 1 foot of space in a room that's 12 feet wide, but that still leaves me plenty of working space for my purposes. The construction of the ceiling cloud is quite a bit different. I've created 12 wood frames that are about 2 by 5 foot each and are wrapped in the same type of acoustic fabric that I used on the wall panels. The panels are hung 7 feet above the floor, and above them I've placed the acoustic insulation on lats, and above that is another 8 inches of empty space, with the next surface being the plywood of the first floor of the house. Finally, I placed bass traps in the room's front corners. I built these using 2 by 4s. The left trap is 7 feet tall, while the right is 5 feet tall. Each are triangle-shaped, about 20 inches deep, and stuffed their entire height with the same insulation I used in the other panels. Rather than attempting to wrap the bass traps with acoustic fabric, I built 2 additional wall panels and hung them on the front of the traps. After the acoustic panels were installed and the room was furnished, I played a reference track. Then I used my ear to determine how the room sounded. It sounded quite good, actually. So I figured I didn't need to do much with diffusion. The back wall of the studio is quite irregular due to the staircase. I decided to install a 4 by 7 foot panel behind my listening position. The wood frame of this panel is covered by a couple of sheets of pegboard. Both sides are wrapped with the same acoustic fabric I used elsewhere. I love the way it looks, but does it really help with diffusion? I think so, but it's very subtle. The bookshelf helps to scatter reflections as well, as do the various pieces of art arranged along the rear of the room. The floor uses a highly reflective vinyl laminate, but that really wasn't a concern for me. In fact, when I track acoustic guitars, I found that it helps to add a little ambient brightness to my recordings. That said, I've covered roughly 1/2 of the room's floor with a rug to help a little bit with absorption. While I've been a musician for most of my life, I'd never looked too deeply into acoustic science. This was a really fascinating area for me, and I learned so much. I hope I was able to give you a few ideas for your own studio. Well, that's it for this episode. Thank you so much again for joining me. In the next episode, I'll cover a few of the things I did to make my workflow easier and more productive, and to also help me get into that all too elusive flow state. Until then, be well.